A wounded German shepherd thrown away like trash in a dumpster full of debris. But what a baby found there changed everything that day and touched everyone's heart. Subscribe now and see how one simple gesture made all the difference. The neighborhood of Pinewood Heights on the outskirts of Riverside, Pennsylvania, was little more than a muddy promise. Half-finished houses stood alongside vacant lots, the constant buzz of construction equipment providing the soundtrack to daily life. Jessica Taylor had moved into one of the newly painted homes just 3 weeks ago, hoping the affordable prices of this developing area would give her and her 15-month-old son Ethan a fresh start. Today, like most mornings, Jessica was unpacking boxes in their modest 2-bedroom home, organizing kitchen supplies, while occasionally glancing out the window at Ethan. Her energetic toddler was playing in their small, unfenced backyard that opened directly to the street, a temporary arrangement until the fencing company could fit them into their busy schedule. Jessica wiped sweat from her forehead, pushing back a strand of auburn hair. The late August heat was oppressive, especially in a house where the air conditioning still worked only sporadically. She turned to check on Ethan again, expecting to see him exploring the dirt pile he'd been fascinated with all morning. Her heart skipped a beat when she didn't immediately spot him. "Ethan?" she called, moving quickly to the back door. Relief washed over her when she saw him just a few yards away, but that relief quickly transformed into concern. Her son stood, perfectly still, his small hands gripping the edge of a large construction dumpster that had been abandoned next to an unfinished house across the street. "Ethan!" Jessica called sharply, rushing across the yard. As she approached, an acrid smell hit her, dust, garbage, and something else, something animal. Ethan didn't turn at her voice, which was unusual. His attention remained fixed on whatever he'd found inside the dumpster. When Jessica reached him and peered over the metal edge, her hand flew to her mouth. Amid broken tiles, splintered wood, and torn trash bags lay a German shepherd, its coat matted with dried paint, cement dust, and what appeared to be blood. The dog's chest rose and fell with labored breaths, one paw twisted at an unnatural angle. Despite its obvious distress, the animal's eyes were open, fixed on Ethan with what Jessica could only describe as recognition. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered, instinctively pulling Ethan away. But her son resisted, straining toward the dumpster, his face scrunched up in distress as he began to cry and point. "Doggy," Ethan sobbed, one of the few words in his limited vocabulary. "Doggy hurt." Jessica hesitated. Her first instinct was to get Ethan away from a potentially dangerous animal, but something about the way the dog was looking at her son, not with aggression, but with what seemed like relief, made her pause. "Stay right here, baby," she told Ethan firmly, setting him down several feet away. Jessica approached the dumpster again and called out to a neighbor who was retrieving his mail. "Mr. Sullivan, I need help, please." Within minutes, several neighbors had gathered. Mr. Sullivan, a retired firefighter, carefully assessed the situation. "That poor thing's been badly hurt," he said grimly. "Looks like he's been here a while. We need to get him to a vet," Jessica insisted, surprised by her own vehemence. She barely made ends meet as a part-time graphic designer working from home while caring for Ethan. A wounded stray dog was the last thing she needed in her life. Yet something about the animal's eyes, about Ethan's reaction, compelled her. Her son had never shown such strong emotion about anything before. He stood nearby, still crying softly, repeating "doggy" over and over. With the help of Mr. Sullivan and 2 other neighbors, they managed to lift the injured dog onto an old door that served as a makeshift stretcher. Jessica called the only veterinary clinic in Riverside, while the neighbors carefully placed the dog in the back of Mr. Sullivan's pickup truck. "I'll take Ethan to my place," offered Mrs. Martinez from next door, a grandmother whose kindness had been a blessing since Jessica moved in. "No," Jessica said, surprised by her son's behavior as he clung to her leg, still pointing at the dog. I think I think he needs to come with us." The Riverside Animal Hospital was a small, one-story building on the edge of town. Dr. Michael Wilson, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a weathered face, met them at the door. "Bring him straight to the back," he instructed, leading them to an examination room. As they laid the German Shepherd on the metal table, Dr. Wilson's expression grew grave. "Multiple fractures, signs of infection, severe dehydration," he murmured as he examined the animal. "And older evidence of neglect. This dog's been through hell." "Will he make it?" Jessica asked, holding Ethan on her hip. Her son had gone quiet but remained focused intensely on the dog. "Hard to say," Dr. Wilson replied honestly. "The next 48 hours will be critical. What's strange is his behavior." The veterinarian gestured toward the dog, who, despite obvious pain, remained calm as they examined him. Most animals in this condition would be aggressive or try to escape, but he's just watching. Jessica followed the dog's gaze, which remained fixed on Ethan. Her son reached out a small hand toward the animal, and Jessica instinctively pulled him back. "It's okay," Dr. Wilson said softly. "He's not showing any signs of aggression. In fact," he paused, checking the monitor attached to the dog, "his heart rate actually stabilized when your son approached." Jessica reluctantly allowed Ethan to move closer, keeping a protective arm around him. Her son reached out again, and this time she let his small fingers gently touch the dog's head. The German Shepherd closed his eyes briefly, as if in relief. "That's unusual," Dr. Wilson murmured. "He doesn't even like our neighbor's friendly Labrador," Jessica explained, watching in amazement. "I've never seen him react to an animal like this." After more examination, Dr. Wilson confirmed that the dog had no collar or microchip. "We'll report him to animal control, see if anyone's looking for a missing German Shepherd. But given his condition, someone did this to him," Jessica finished, a wave of anger washing over her. "They threw him away like garbage." As they prepared to leave, Ethan became inconsolable, reaching for the dog and crying. Jessica had never seen such behavior from her normally easygoing son. Can I bring him back tomorrow?" Jessica asked, bouncing Ethan gently as he continued to fuss. "Just to visit. He seems really attached already." Dr. Wilson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Actually, that might be good for both of them. I'll be honest with you, Ms. Taylor. This dog's physical injuries are severe, but I've seen animals pull through worse. What concerns me is that animals who've been abused often give up. They lose the will to fight, but there's something about your son that seems to be giving this dog a reason." As Jessica carried a still distressed Ethan to her car, her mind raced with questions. How had the dog ended up in that dumpster? Why was her son so affected by him? And most puzzling, why did she feel such a strong connection herself, as if helping this animal was somehow critically important? That night, Ethan refused to eat dinner and became agitated at bedtime, something completely out of character. He kept pointing to the window, repeating "doggy" with increasing distress. Jessica finally managed to settle him by showing pictures of German Shepherds on her phone and promising they would visit the hurt doggy tomorrow. As she sat beside Ethan's crib, watching him finally drift off to sleep, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened today wasn't just a random encounter. There was something about the way the dog had looked at her son, not just with animal awareness, but with what seemed like recognition. "It's ridiculous," she whispered to herself in the darkened room. "He's just a dog, and we just happened to find him." But as Jessica finally crawled into her own bed that night, the image of those intelligent eyes watching her son stayed with her, along with a nagging sense that this chance discovery was going to change their lives in ways she couldn't yet imagine. 3 days had passed since the discovery in the construction dumpster, and the German Shepherd, whom the staff at the animal hospital had taken to calling Hunter, was fighting for his life. Jessica had brought Ethan to visit each day, watching with a mixture of amazement and unease as her son's connection with the injured animal seemed to deepen. Today, as they entered the small recovery area where Hunter was being kept, Dr. Wilson greeted them with cautious optimism. His fever broke overnight, he explained, leading them to the large cage where the dog lay on a padded mat, various tubes and monitors attached to his body. But he's still critical. The infections from his untreated wounds are stubborn, and the broken bones will take time to heal properly. Ethan immediately reached toward the cage, babbling excitedly. Jessica noticed that Hunter, despite his weakened state, tried to lift his head at the sound of her son's voice. "It's the strangest thing," mused Dr. Wilson, adjusting one of the IV lines. "He barely responds to the staff, but the moment your son is here..." He gestured to the heart rate monitor, which had begun showing a stronger, more regular pattern. "See that? Happens every time." Jessica nodded, watching as Ethan pressed his small face against the cage bars. "Doggy better," he declared with toddler certainty. "Has anyone reported a missing German Shepherd?" Jessica asked, settling into the plastic chair beside Hunter's cage. She'd been bringing her laptop to these visits, trying to catch up on freelance work while Ethan spent time with the dog. Not yet. Animal Control checked all recent reports, but nothing matches. He's about 7 or 8 years old, well-bred, but showing signs of previous neglect even before whatever led to him being in that dumpster. Jessica watched as Ethan babbled softly to Hunter, who seemed to be listening intently to every nonsensical word. "If no one claims him, what happens?" Dr. Wilson sighed. "Once he's stable enough, he'll go to the county shelter. But with his age and injuries..." He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew older dogs with medical issues rarely found homes. "I see," Jessica said quietly, a heaviness settling in her chest at the thought. She couldn't explain why this particular animal mattered so much, but seeing Ethan's attachment made the prospect of Hunter being sent away distressing. That night, Ethan's behavior grew increasingly concerning. He refused dinner entirely, threw his favorite toys across the room, and cried inconsolably at bedtime. Nothing Jessica did seemed to comfort him. Around midnight, exhausted and desperate, Jessica pulled up the photos she'd taken of Hunter on her phone. Ethan immediately calmed, pointing and saying, "My doggy," with such certainty that it startled her. "He's not our doggy, sweetheart," Jessica explained gently. "He's just a dog we're helping." Ethan looked at her with surprising intensity for a toddler and repeated firmly, "My doggy." The next morning brought even stranger developments. Jessica found Ethan had somehow climbed out of his crib, something he'd never done before, and was sitting by the front door with his little backpack as if waiting to leave. "Doggy sick," he said when Jessica asked what he was doing. "Go, now." At the animal hospital, Dr. Wilson met them with a perplexed expression. "I was about to call you," he said, leading them back to Hunter's enclosure. "He took a turn for the worse around dawn, stopped eating, heart rate dropped. We were considering more aggressive treatments when he suddenly perked up about 20 minutes ago." He checked his watch. "Right around when you two would have been getting in the car, I'm guessing." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. "That's exactly when Ethan woke up, insisting we needed to come here immediately." Dr. Wilson raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Ethan settled beside Hunter's cage, talking softly to the dog who was now watching him with complete focus. "I know it sounds crazy," Jessica said quietly, "but it's like they can sense each other somehow. Ethan's never behaved this way before, with anyone or anything." "I've been a veterinarian for 30 years, Dr. Wilson replied, checking Hunter's vitals. "And I've seen things that medical science doesn't entirely explain. Animals have awareness that we're only beginning to understand." As the days passed, 2 parallel patterns emerged. Hunter responded to treatment better when Ethan was present, and Ethan became inconsolable when separated from Hunter for too long. Jessica began bringing toys and books to their daily visits, creating a small play area beside Hunter's cage while she worked on her laptop. The staff grew accustomed to their presence, making accommodations for the unusual situation. A week after Hunter's rescue, Jessica was sitting in her now usual spot when Amanda, the clinic receptionist, approached with a folder. "Dr. Wilson asked me to show you this," she said, handing Jessica a printout. "It just came in from Animal Control." It was a missing pet report filed 3 months earlier. The description matched Hunter perfectly. Male German Shepherd, approximately 8 years old, with a distinctive white patch on his chest in the shape of a diamond. The report had been filed by someone named Margaret Andrews from Cedarwood, a town nearly 30 miles away. Jessica stared at the name, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. Andrews, her maiden name. It had to be a coincidence. Andrews was common enough. "Did they contact the owner?" Jessica asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Amanda's expression softened. "They tried, but the numbers disconnected. They're going to send someone to the address, but from what I understand, Cedarwood Animal Control thinks the owner may have passed on." The report was filed by a neighbor who was concerned when she noticed the dog was gone after the owner had been hospitalized. Jessica nodded absently, looking from the report to Ethan, who was showing Hunter a picture book, completely oblivious to the adults' conversation. Margaret Andrews from Cedarwood. The name tugged at something in Jessica's memory, but she couldn't place it. Her own family connections to Cedarwood were tenuous at best. Her parents had moved away when she was very young, and most of her relatives were scattered across different states. That evening, after putting Ethan to bed, Jessica found herself searching through old family photos stored in digital albums on her laptop. Her family had never been particularly close-knit, especially after her parents' bitter divorce when she was 7. She'd lost touch with many relatives over the years, including her older brother William, who had moved to the West Coast over a decade ago. As she scrolled through old holiday photos, a particular image caught her attention, a Thanksgiving gathering from when she was about 5 years old. She zoomed in on an elderly woman sitting in an armchair, a young German Shepherd puppy at her feet. The caption read, "Grandma Margaret, Jessica and new puppy commander, Thanksgiving 2001. Jessica stared at the screen, memories flooding back like water through a broken dam. Grandma Margaret, her father's mother, the house in Cedarwood, the puppy she'd played with during those rare family visits. How could she have forgotten? She quickly searched for more photos and found another, herself as a child, maybe 6 years old, hugging a young German Shepherd. She was smiling widely, showing a missing front tooth. On the back of the scanned photo was a handwritten note. "Jessica and Commander, summer 2002, the best of friends." Jessica's hands trembled as she picked up her phone and dialed her mother, despite the late hour. "Mom, I need to ask you something. Do you remember Dad's mother, Grandma Margaret? Did she live in Cedarwood, and did she have a German Shepherd?" Her mother's voice came through, thick with sleep but gradually sharpening with interest. "Margaret? Yes, she lived in that little blue house in Cedarwood until the end. And yes, she always had German Shepherds. It was like a tradition with her. Why are you asking about this now?" "When did she pass away?" Jessica asked, ignoring the question. "Let me think. It must have been about 3 months ago. Your brother William handled everything, since he was the only one in contact with her in recent years." "Jessica, what's going on?" Jessica's mind raced. 3 months ago, exactly when the missing dog report had been filed. "Mom, do you know what happened to her dog after she died?" "No idea. William would know. He went to clean out her house afterward." "Jessica, it's nearly midnight. Why are you suddenly interested in your grandmother's dog?" Jessica ended the call shortly after, promising to explain everything later. She sat in the dim light of her kitchen, trying to process what she was learning. The German Shepherd they'd found, Hunter, Could it possibly be her grandmother's dog? The timing matched, but how would he have traveled 30 miles from Cedarwood to end up in a construction dumpster in Riverside? And more importantly, how could Ethan, who had never met Margaret or her dog, have formed such an immediate and powerful connection to an animal that might have been part of Jessica's own forgotten childhood? As if summoned by her thoughts, Ethan's cry came through the baby monitor. Jessica hurried to his room, finding him standing in his crib, pointing toward the window. "Doggy remembers," he said with startling clarity, his eyes wide and serious. "In the glow of the nightlight, Doggy knows us." Jessica gathered her son into her arms, a shiver running down her spine despite the warm night. "What do you mean, baby? How does Doggy know us?" But Ethan had already settled against her shoulder, his eyes drooping with renewed sleepiness. As Jessica rocked him back to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that what they'd stumbled upon wasn't just an abandoned animal, but a piece of her own past that had somehow found its way back to her, through her son. "It's impossible," she whispered to herself. Yet as Ethan's breathing deepened into sleep, Jessica made a decision. Tomorrow she would call her brother. And she would find out exactly what had happened to their grandmother's dog after Margaret Andrews had passed away. The call to William didn't go as Jessica had planned. Her brother, always busy with his real estate development company in Seattle, had been brusque and dismissive. "A German Shepherd? Yeah, Grandma had one. What about it?" His voice had carried that familiar edge of impatience that had characterized most of their infrequent conversations over the years. "What happened to him after Grandma passed?" Jessica had asked, trying to keep her tone neutral despite the growing suspicion in her mind. "I arranged for everything to be handled. The house, her belongings, all of it." William's answer had been deliberately vague. "Look, I'm heading into a meeting. Was there something specific you needed?" Jessica had pressed further, explaining about finding the injured dog in the dumpster, but William had cut her off before she could finish. "Jessica, I don't have time for this. Grandma's dog was old and sick. I made arrangements. End of story. I've got to go." The abrupt end to the call left Jessica with more questions than answers, and a growing sense of unease about her brother's involvement. Now, a day later, Jessica sat in Dr. Wilson's office while Ethan played with Hunter, who had been moved to a larger recovery area. The dog's improvement had been remarkable over the past few days. He was now able to stand briefly and had started eating regularly. Dr. Wilson had just shared the results of his conversations with Cedarwood Animal Control. According to their records, Margaret Andrews was hospitalized after a fall in late May, he explained, reviewing the notes. Her neighbor, a Mrs. Thompson, reported the dog missing 2 days later. Apparently, someone had come to check on the house, and the dog disappeared around that time. "That would have been William," Jessica said quietly, watching Ethan gently stroke Hunter's head. "My brother handled everything after our grandmother was hospitalized." Dr. Wilson raised an eyebrow. "Your grandmother? Margaret Andrews was your grandmother?" Jessica nodded, still struggling to reconcile the fragments of memory that had been returning since she'd seen those old photographs. "I hadn't seen her in years, not since I was a child. My parents divorced, we moved away, and family connections just faded." She brushed a strand of hair from her face, feeling a pang of guilt. "I barely remembered her until I saw those old pictures. And you think this might be her dog? The timing fits. And there's this." Jessica pulled out her phone and showed Dr. Wilson the childhood photo of her with the puppy. That was her dog Commander when he was young. German Shepherds live, 10 to 12 years? The age would be about right. Dr. Wilson studied the photo, then looked at Hunter. "The marking on the chest is similar, that diamond shape. It's certainly possible." He hesitated, but that doesn't explain how he ended up 30 miles away in a construction dumpster. Jessica's expression hardened. "I think my brother might know more than he's telling me. In that afternoon, Jessica made an impulsive decision. After dropping Ethan off with Mrs. Martinez for a few hours, she drove to Cedarwood, following the address on the missing dog report. Margaret Andrews' house was a small blue bungalow on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees. It looked well-maintained, but empty, a for sale sign planted in the front yard. As Jessica parked across the street, studying the house where she'd once visited as a child, an elderly woman emerged from the neighboring property, eyeing her curiously. "Are you interested in the Andrews place?" the woman called, making her way slowly to the white picket fence that separated the properties. Jessica approached, recognizing an opportunity. "Actually, I'm Jessica Taylor, née Andrews. Margaret was my grandmother." The woman's face lit up with recognition. "Oh my goodness, little Jessica! I haven't seen you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper." She extended a weathered hand. "I'm Betty Thompson. I was your grandmother's neighbor for over 30 years. Mrs. Thompson, the same neighbor who had filed the missing dog report." Jessica felt a surge of anticipation as she shook the woman's hand. "I've been trying to piece together what happened to my grandmother's dog," Jessica explained. "I understand you reported him missing." Mrs. Thompson's expression clouded. "Such a shame about Commander. That dog was Margaret's whole world after your grandfather passed. She'd raised him from a puppy." She gestured toward Jessica's car. "Would you like to come in for some iced tea? It's too hot to stand out here talking." Room. In Mrs. Thompson's cozy living room, surrounded by framed photographs and knickknacks collected over decades, Jessica learned more about her grandmother's final years than she had ever known. Margaret had lived alone, but had remained active in the community, volunteering at the local library and tending her garden. Commander, her faithful companion, had been at her side constantly. "The day after Margaret was taken to the hospital, your brother showed up," Mrs. Thompson recalled, pouring more tea into Jessica's glass. "I introduced myself, offered to help with anything she needed. He was polite but distant, said he'd handle everything. I noticed Commander was gone the next morning. When I asked your brother about it, he said he'd made arrangements for the dog while he sorted out Margaret's affairs." "What kind of arrangements?" Jessica pressed. Mrs. Thompson shook her head. "He didn't say, and I didn't feel it was my place to push, but it didn't sit right with me. That dog was devoted to your grandmother. He wasn't just some possession to be arranged for, you know. That's why I filed the report." As they talked, Mrs. Thompson disappeared briefly into another room, returning with a small wooden box. "Margaret asked me to keep this in case anything ever happened to her. She said it was for you and your brother, though she hadn't seen either of you in years. I tried giving it to William, but he wasn't interested. Said he was too busy clearing out the house to deal with sentimental junk." Jessica accepted the box with trembling hands. Inside were several envelopes, each labeled with names, one for William, one for Jessica, and surprisingly one marked for Jessica's children. There were also a few pieces of jewelry and a small photo album. "She never stopped talking about you," Mrs. Thompson said softly. "Even after all those years, she kept every school picture your mother sent, every Christmas card. She understood why you didn't visit. The distance, the family complications. She never blamed you." Jessica felt tears pricking at her eyes as she opened the envelope with her name. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated just 6 months earlier. "My dearest Jessica, if you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever comes next. I hope this letter finds you well and happy. I've thought of you often over the years, wondered what kind of woman you've become. The little girl I remember was spirited and kind, especially to animals. Do you remember how you and Commander were inseparable during your visits? I've enclosed something special in the envelope for your children. It's a tradition in our family that goes back generations, a small reminder that we're never truly alone, that love persists across time and distance. Commander has been my faithful companion these last years. I hope that if you have children of your own one day, they will know the special bond that comes from growing up with such a faithful friend. All my love, Grandma Margaret. Jessica wiped away tears and carefully opened the envelope marked, "For Jessica's children." Inside was a small silver pendant in the shape of a dog silhouette, along with another note. "For protection, guidance, and unconditional love, may this remind you that family watches over you even when you can't see them." As Jessica held the pendant, something clicked into place. A memory of her grandmother showing her an identical pendant as a child, explaining that it had been passed down through generations of their family. Jessica had forgotten about it entirely until this moment. When she finally left Mrs. Thompson's house, Jessica had more pieces of the puzzle, but the central question remained unanswered. How had Commander ended up in that construction dumpster? And why had William been so evasive about what had happened? Back in Riverside that evening, after picking up Ethan and putting him to bed, Jessica made one more call to her cousin Jennifer, William's ex-wife, who had remained loosely in touch over the years. William went to clear out Margaret's house. Jennifer sounded surprised. That's odd. He hired a cleaning service for that. He was only there for a day, maybe two. Said he didn't have time to deal with an old house full of memories. Classic William, avoiding emotional labor. Her tone carried years of bitter experience. "Do you know if he mentioned anything about her dog?" Jessica asked. "Actually, yes. He complained about it. Said it was old and sick, getting in the way while he was trying to inventory the valuable items. He said..." Jennifer paused. "He said he took care of it but didn't elaborate. I assumed he took it to a shelter or found it a home." After hanging up, Jessica sat in her darkened kitchen, pieces falling into place. William, always efficient, always focused on the bottom line, would have seen an elderly dog as a complication to be eliminated as quickly as possible. He wouldn't have intentionally harmed Commander, but he might have made the most expedient choice, hiring someone to dispose of the problem. But why would Commander end up 30 miles away in Riverside? Jessica pulled out her laptop and began researching her brother's real estate company. Within minutes, she found her answer. William's company had recently invested in a new housing development. The location, Pinewood Heights, Riverside, Pennsylvania, the very neighborhood where Jessica had moved. Of all the coincidences, this seemed too improbable. Jessica's mind raced with possibilities. Had William's cleanup crew dumped the dog near one of his development properties? Had Commander somehow made his way to Riverside, drawn by some inexplicable instinct or connection? And most perplexing of all, how had Ethan formed such an immediate and powerful bond with a dog that was, potentially, a link to Jessica's own forgotten past? Jessica opened the small wooden box again, running her fingers over the silver pendant. "For protection, guidance, and unconditional love," she read aloud, the words taking on new meaning in light of everything that had happened. Whatever the full truth was, Jessica was now certain of one thing: finding Commander hadn't been mere chance. Something more profound was at work, something that connected her son, her grandmother, and a dog that had found his way back to her family against impossible odds. Tomorrow, she decided, she would confront William directly. But tonight, she held the pendant in her palm and allowed herself to remember the grandmother she had nearly forgotten, and to wonder what Margaret Andrews might have known about the special bond between children and the animals who protect them. As Jessica finally prepared for bed, she heard Ethan stirring on the baby monitor. When she checked on him, she found him sitting up in his crib, wide awake despite the late hour. "What is it, sweetie?" she asked, lifting him into her arms. Ethan pointed to the window, then to the pendant Jessica still held in her hand. "Doggy coming home," he said with surprising clarity. Then, snuggling against her shoulder, he added, "Grandma says so." Jessica froze, a chill running down her spine. She had never spoken to Ethan about his great-grandmother. He couldn't possibly know about Margaret Andrews, yet he had just mentioned her with such certainty. "What did you say, Ethan?" she whispered, but her son had already drifted back to sleep, leaving Jessica to wonder if she had imagined the moment. As she tucked him back into his crib, Jessica placed the silver pendant on the small shelf above his bed, where the moonlight caught its edges, casting a dog-shaped shadow on the wall. Whether by chance or something more mysterious, a piece of their family history had found its way back to them through the unlikely form of an abandoned, injured animal. And tomorrow, Jessica was determined to uncover the full truth of how that had happened. She returned to her bedroom and pulled out her phone, dialing William's number despite the late hour. This time, she wouldn't accept vague answers or dismissals. This time, her brother would have to explain exactly what had happened to Commander after Margaret Andrews had passed away, and why a dog that should have been cared for had ended up abandoned and injured in a construction dumpster 30 miles from home. As the phone rang, Jessica steeled herself for the conversation ahead. The mystery of Commander's journey was only part of what she needed to understand. There was also the inexplicable connection between Ethan and the dog, a connection that seemed to transcend ordinary explanation. As if somehow, across time and distance and against all probability, they had recognized each other from the moment they met. "Hello?" William's voice, groggy with sleep, finally answered. "Jessica, do you know what time it is?" "Yes, I know exactly what time it is," Jessica replied firmly. "And it's time you told me the truth about what happened to Grandma Margaret's dog." The animal hospital had become a second home over the past 2 weeks. Today, though, Jessica arrived with a different purpose, her conversation with Mrs. Thompson and the contents of Margaret's wooden box weighing heavily on her mind. Ethan, as always, headed straight for Hunter, who was now able to stand and move around a small enclosed recovery area. "He's doing remarkably well," Dr. Wilson observed, joining Jessica as she watched Ethan gently play with the dog. "At this rate, he could be cleared for adoption within a week or 2. The word adoption sent a flutter of anxiety through Jessica. She'd been avoiding thinking about Hunter's future, focusing instead on his recovery and the mystery of how he'd ended up in that dumpster. But time was running out, and decisions would need to be made. "I've been doing some research," Jessica said, showing Dr. Wilson the pendant and explaining her discoveries about her grandmother and William's connection to the Riverside development. "I'm almost certain this is Commander, my grandmother's dog, and I think my brother had something to do with how he ended up here." Dr. Wilson examined the pendant thoughtfully. "This is quite a story, Jessica, but even if it's all true, I'm not sure what it means for Hunter, or Commander, I should say." "I don't either," Jessica admitted, "but I feel like I need to understand what happened before I can decide what happens next." She watched Ethan laughing as Hunter gently nuzzled his hand, for both their sakes. After leaving the animal hospital, Jessica drove to the local coffee shop where she'd arranged to meet her brother. William had been surprised by her late-night call, but had agreed to the meeting since he happened to be in Pennsylvania checking on his development projects. William Taylor arrived precisely on time, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the casual coffee shop. At 38, he was 7 years older than Jessica, with the same dark hair, but none of the warmth in his eyes. Their relationship had been distant for years, limited to occasional holiday phone calls and family emergencies. "I don't have much time," he said after brief pleasantries, checking his watch. "What was so urgent that it couldn't be handled over the phone?" Jessica took a deep breath. "I want to know what happened to Grandma Margaret's dog after she was hospitalized." William's expression flickered briefly before settling into careful neutrality. "I told you, I made arrangements. The dog was old and sick. What does it matter now?" "It matters because I think I found him." Jessica replied, sliding her phone across the table with a photo of Hunter at the animal hospital. In a construction dumpster near one of your development properties in Riverside, nearly dead from injuries and neglect. William stared at the photo, his composure faltering momentarily. That's not possible. The crew I hired assured me they would handle it humanely. Handle it? What exactly did you tell them to do, William? Her brother shifted uncomfortably, lowering his voice. Look, I was dealing with a house full of decades' worth of accumulation, contractors renovating for resale, and a million other details. The dog was just one more complication. He was old, Jessica, probably in pain. I asked a local company to take care of him quickly and humanely. What company? Jessica pressed. Some junk removal service I found online. They said they could handle everything in the house that wasn't marked for keeping. William winced at his own words. I didn't specifically tell them to. I assumed they would take him to a shelter or have him put down properly if necessary. You treated Grandma's beloved companion like he was a broken appliance to be hauled away, Jessica said, her voice rising despite her effort to remain calm. Several customers glanced their way. Did you even check what they did with him? William had the decency to look ashamed. No, I was in town for less than 48 hours. I had meetings back in Seattle, deadlines. I just wanted everything cleared out so the renovation could proceed. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. The cleaning crew assured me they'd take care of everything. I paid them extra to handle it quickly. And you never thought to check? Jessica asked incredulously. I assumed it was handled, William repeated defensively. How was I supposed to know they'd just dump him? And how did he end up in Riverside anyway? Jessica pulled out her laptop and showed William the website for his own development company, highlighting the Pinewood Heights project in Riverside. Your company is developing the neighborhood where I live now, where I found the dog. Don't you see? The cleaning crew must have connections to your construction teams. They probably figured they could cut corners by dumping an old dog near one of your other projects instead of dealing with him properly. William stared at the screen, the implications sinking in. I had no idea, he said quietly. Jessica, you have to believe me. I would never have authorized that. I may have wanted the situation handled efficiently, but I'm not cruel. Jessica wanted to stay angry, but the genuine shock and remorse on her brother's face made it difficult. This was typical William. Not malicious, just detached, always delegating emotional labor to others, focusing on efficiency over empathy. There's more, Jessica said, opening Margaret's wooden box and showing him the letters and pendant. Grandma left these for us, for our family. She never stopped thinking about us, William, even after we stopped visiting. William took the letter addressed to him with reluctance, as if afraid of what it might contain. As he read, Jessica saw something she'd rarely witnessed. Her brother's carefully maintained facade cracking, revealing the vulnerability beneath. I didn't know, he said finally, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. I was so focused on handling her estate efficiently that I never stopped to consider what any of it meant. What she meant, he looked up at Jessica. I never even went through her personal things. I just had the crew clear everything out while I dealt with the legal paperwork. That's why you didn't know about these letters, Jessica said, understanding. Dawning. Mrs. Thompson tried to give you the box, but you refused it. William nodded, unable to meet her eyes. I told her to donate anything sentimental. I didn't want to deal with the emotions of it all. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of missed connections and overlooked relationships settling between them. So what happens now? William finally asked. With the dog, I mean. His name is Commander, Jessica said firmly, and he's been connecting with Ethan in ways I can't explain. It's like they knew each other from the moment they met, even though that's impossible. She showed William the photo of herself as a child with the puppy version of Commander, And then the silver pendant with its inscription about protection and family connections. Grandma believed in something deeper than coincidence, William. She believed that some bonds transcend ordinary understanding. William looked skeptical but didn't argue. What are you saying? That somehow her dog sensed a connection to your son? That's impossible. Maybe. But I've been watching them together for 2 weeks now. There's something there that can't be explained away. Jessica leaned forward. Ethan was the one who found him, William. Of all the people who passed. That dumpster, my 15-month-old son, was the one who noticed Commander and refused to leave him. As they continued talking, William gradually opened up about his own memories of visiting Margaret as a child, recollections he'd pushed aside in his drive to build his career and move beyond what he'd seen as their family's small-town limitations. By the time they parted, something had shifted between the siblings, not a complete reconciliation, but a tentative step toward understanding. "I want to make this right," William said as they stood in the parking lot. "The vet bills, I'll cover all of them, and anything else Commander needs." "That's a start," Jessica acknowledged. "But there's something else you should do. Come with me to the animal hospital. Meet Ethan. See Commander with him. I think you need to witness what's happening for yourself." William hesitated, checking his watch again out of habit. Then, with visible effort, he pocketed it. "Lead the way," he said simply. At the animal hospital, Dr. Wilson was surprised to see Jessica return with William in tow. Ethan was still in the recovery area with Hunter, who had progressed to walking short distances despite his healing injuries. "Ethan, look who's here," Jessica called gently. "This is your Uncle William." Ethan glanced up briefly, but remained focused on Hunter, who had gone very still at the sight of William, the dog's ears flattened slightly, his body tensing. "He remembers you," Jessica said quietly to her brother. "Or at least, he remembers someone associated with what happened to him." William approached slowly, crouching down to Hunter's level. "I'm sorry, old boy," he said softly, the words seeming to surprise even himself. "I didn't know." To everyone's amazement, Ethan picked up one of Hunter's toys and brought it to William. "Play nice," he instructed with toddler seriousness before returning to the dog's side. As William awkwardly tossed the toy, which Hunter watched but made no move to retrieve, Dr. Wilson pulled Jessica aside. "There's something you should see," he said, leading her to his office. "One of the volunteers was organizing old records and found this." He handed Jessica a faded photograph that had been tucked into an old veterinary journal. It showed a young woman holding a German Shepherd puppy, standing in front of what was clearly the same animal hospital, though the building looked newer in the image. "That's this clinic in 1992, Dr. Wilson explained. "The woman is Margaret Andrews. She brought every one of her dogs here, even though it was quite a drive from Cedarwood. My father was the veterinarian then. I took over the practice after he retired. According to his notes, Margaret believed strongly that German Shepherds had special protective qualities. She used to say they could sense things humans couldn't, especially when it came to children." Jessica stared at the photograph, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. So Commander would have been treated here before. Not this Commander. He would have been too young. But his predecessors, yes. This clinic was part of Margaret's routine for decades. Dr. Wilson's expression was thoughtful. "Animals have memory and instinct we don't fully understand. When Commander was injured and abandoned, perhaps something in him recognized this place as safe." As Jessica returned to the recovery area, she found William sitting on the floor, watching Ethan and Hunter with an expression of wonder. "He's talking to the dog," William said quietly as Jessica joined him. "Actual sentences, not just words. I've never seen anything like it." Ethan was indeed speaking more clearly than Jessica had ever heard, telling Hunter about his favorite toys and books in simple but distinct phrases. The dog listened with complete attention, his eyes never leaving the child. "It's like they have their own language," Jessica murmured. Then, reaching a decision that had been forming for days, she turned to Dr. Wilson. "What would I need to do to adopt him?" The paperwork was surprisingly straightforward. Since no owner had claimed Hunter despite the missing pet report and sufficient time had passed since his rescue, Jessica could apply for legal ownership. William, true to his word, covered all the medical expenses and contributed toward Hunter's future care. As they completed the forms, Amanda from reception entered with an envelope. "This was just delivered for you, Jessica," she said. "The courier said it was urgent." Inside was a single photograph and a note from Mrs. Thompson. The photo showed Margaret as a young woman holding a German Shepherd puppy with a little girl of about 3 beside her. On the back was written, "Margaret, 1st Commander, and little Jessica, 1991. Mrs. Thompson's note explained, "Found this while going through some old albums. Thought you should know. You were there when the 1st Commander came home. Margaret always said the connection between children and these dogs was special in your family. Something about guardians finding their way home." Jessica showed the photo to William, whose expression softened further. "I remember now," he said quietly. "Grandma's dogs were always named Commander, one after another. It was a family tradition. She used to tell us stories about how they were more than pets. They were protectors, connected to us in ways that went beyond ordinary understanding." As Ethan continued his one-sided conversation with Hunter, now officially renamed Commander, the dog's attentive gaze never wavered. Jessica fingered the silver pendant in her pocket. Protection, guidance, unconditional love. Perhaps Margaret had understood something that Jessica was only beginning to glimpse. Perhaps some connections truly did transcend ordinary explanation, binding family across time and distance in ways that seemed impossible until you witnessed them yourself. And as Commander finally, tentatively, licked Ethan's outstretched hand, Jessica felt certain of one thing. This dog hadn't just been dumped by chance near her home. Somehow, against all odds, he had found his way back to family. "There's one more thing," William said hesitantly as they prepared to leave. He pulled a business card from his wallet and wrote something on the back. "This is the company I hired to clear out Grandma's house. Maybe they can tell us more about what happened to Commander after they took him." Jessica accepted the card, studying the name, "Clear It All Junk Removal." On the back, William had written a contact name and phone number. "I'll call them tomorrow," she promised. "But right now, I think what matters most is that Commander is home." As they walked to the parking lot, William paused by Jessica's car. "I've been thinking about what Grandma wrote in her letter, about love persisting across time and distance. I never gave much weight to that kind of thing before, but seeing Ethan with Commander," he shook his head, searching for words. "It makes me wonder what else I've been missing by focusing only on what can be logically explained." Jessica smiled, watching as Ethan waved goodbye to his uncle from his car seat. "Maybe that's the real gift Grandma left us. Not just the pendant or the letters, but a reminder that there are connections in this world that go deeper than we understand. And sometimes those connections find a way to bring us back together, even when everything seems lost." As William drove away, Jessica felt a sense of peace settling over her. The mystery of Commander's journey wasn't completely solved, but the important part, the dog's return to his family, had been accomplished against impossible odds. Tomorrow, she would call the junk removal company and try to piece together the final details of how Commander had ended up in that dumpster. But tonight, she would take her son and his guardian home, where they belonged, and she would hang the silver pendant in Ethan's room, a reminder of the grandmother who had believed in connections that transcended ordinary understanding. Connections that somehow had found a way to persist, even when they seemed irretrievably lost. 2 months had passed since Commander had come home with Jessica and Ethan. The German Shepherd's physical recovery had been remarkable. His broken bones had healed, his coat had regained its shine, and while he still limped slightly on his formerly injured paw, he moved with increasing confidence each day. The emotional healing had been even more profound, visible in the way Commander now approached each day with calm certainty, as if he had finally found his place in the world. The small house in Pinewood Heights had transformed as well. The once empty backyard now featured a sturdy fence, courtesy of William, who had insisted on paying for it, and toys were scattered across the lawn, some belonging to Ethan, others to Commander. Jessica had converted the spare bedroom into a proper office space, allowing her to take on more freelance graphic design projects while keeping an eye on her son and his canine guardian. Today, Jessica was watching them through the kitchen window as she finished a phone call that had answered the final questions about Commander's journey. "So that's what happened," she said to Dr. Wilson, who had stopped by to check on Commander's progress. "I finally reached someone at the junk removal company who remembered the job at my grandmother's house." "And," Dr. Wilson prompted, accepting the coffee Jessica offered. The worker admitted everything. They were supposed to take Commander to the animal shelter in Cedarwood, but the shelter was full that day and required a surrender fee. He claimed he didn't have authorization to spend extra money, so he decided to find another solution. Jessica's voice tightened with controlled anger. He had a friend working on William's development in Riverside and figured he could leave Commander there temporarily, then come back for him later. "Let me guess. He never went back, Doctor," Wilson said grimly. Jessica nodded. "Commander escaped from the shed where they'd left him. They searched briefly but gave up, assuming he'd be fine on his own or someone would find him. Eventually, he must have been injured somehow and crawled into that dumpster to shelter. The worker sounded genuinely remorseful when I confronted him, but still." She shook her head, watching Ethan and Commander through the window. "It's hard to forgive that kind of carelessness." "What did William say when you told him?" "He's filing a complaint against the company and reviewing all his contractors. It won't undo what happened, but at least it might prevent something similar in the future." Jessica smiled faintly. "He's changed since all this happened. We both have." Outside, Ethan was sitting in the grass beside Commander, chattering away as he often did. The bond between them had only strengthened over the weeks. Ethan's language skills had blossomed remarkably, something his pediatrician had noted with surprise at his recent checkup. "It's as if he's been motivated to communicate," the doctor had commented. "There's still one thing I don't understand," Jessica said, turning back to Dr. Wilson. "Of all the places Commander could have ended up, he was found by my son. The mathematical probability of that happening by pure chance." Dr. Wilson smiled. "In my 30 years of veterinary practice, I've seen things I can't explain with medical science. Animals have instincts and awareness that go beyond our understanding." He nodded toward the silver pendant that now hung framed on the wall alongside. Photos of Margaret and her succession of German shepherds over the years. "Perhaps your grandmother understood something the rest of us are still learning." After Dr. Wilson left, Jessica joined Ethan and Commander in the backyard. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass as Ethan demonstrated his newest skill, throwing a ball for Commander to retrieve. The dog, still careful with his healing leg, brought the ball back each time with gentle precision, placing it directly in Ethan's small hands. "Good job, buddy," Jessica praised, sitting cross-legged on the lawn. As Ethan prepared to throw again, Jessica noticed Commander suddenly lift his head, ears alert. Following his gaze, she spotted Mrs. Martinez approaching from next door, carrying a small package. "Special delivery," the older woman called cheerfully. "This came to my house by mistake." She handed Jessica a padded envelope with Margaret, Andrew's Cedarwood address crossed out, and Jessica's new address written below. "That's odd," Jessica murmured, thanking Mrs. Martinez. "This is addressed to my grandmother originally." After her neighbor returned home, Jessica carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a small leather-bound journal and a note from Mrs. Thompson. Jessica, I found this while clearing some of my own belongings. Your grandmother gave it to me years ago for safekeeping, saying it contained family history that should be preserved. With all that's happened, I thought it should be with you now. Jessica opened the journal carefully, its pages yellowed with age. It appeared to be a family record dating back nearly a century. As she skimmed through the entries, written in different handwritings across generations, a pattern emerged that sent chills down her spine. Entry after entry described the same phenomenon: German shepherds finding their way to family members in moments of transition or need, particularly to children. Jessica's great-grandmother had documented how a German shepherd had appeared at their rural farmhouse the day her daughter, Margaret, was born during a snowstorm. Margaret herself had written about finding a stray German shepherd puppy, the first commander, on the same day she learned she was pregnant with Jessica's father. The final entry was in Margaret's shaky handwriting, dated just weeks before her hospitalization. I wonder if the tradition will continue with Jessica's children. She hasn't visited in years, but I sense her son will need protection, just as our family always has. Commander is old, now like me, but the bond never ends with one lifetime. Some connections transcend what we can see or touch. They find a way. Jessica closed the journal, her eyes filling with tears as she watched Ethan lean against Commander, both of them content in the fading afternoon light. The dog's eyes met hers with that same intelligent awareness she'd noticed from the beginning. Not just animal instinct, but something deeper, something that seemed to recognize her on a level beyond ordinary understanding. "Were you looking for us all along?" Jessica whispered, reaching out to stroke Commander's head. The dog leaned into her touch, his gaze steady and knowing. That evening, as Jessica tucked Ethan into bed, Commander settled in his customary spot on the floor beside the crib. The silver pendant caught the soft glow of the nightlight, casting faint shadows across the walls. "Grandma's doggy," Ethan murmured sleepily, pointing to Commander. "That's right, sweetie," Jessica said, smoothing his hair. "But he's our doggy now." Ethan shook his head with surprising certainty. "Always our doggy, just took time to find us." As Jessica kissed her son goodnight and headed to the door, she paused to look back at the tableau, her son drifting to sleep, Commander watchful beside him, the pendant gleaming softly above. The journal had revealed what Margaret had known all along, that some bonds existed before they were recognized, that some connections were meant to be, finding their way across time and distance against all probability. The neighborhood outside was still under construction, still a work in progress. But inside this room, something had been completed, a circle closed, a promise fulfilled. A guardian had found his way home, crossing 30 miles of separation, surviving abandonment and injury, defying logic and chance to reconnect with the family he was meant to protect. As Commander rested his head on his paws, his eyes remained open, watching over Ethan with steady devotion. Outside, the evening wind carried the sounds of the developing neighborhood. Hammers, distant voices, the promise of new beginnings. Inside, in the quiet of the room, ancient patterns continued, unseen but powerful. Protection, guidance, unconditional. Love, passing from generation to generation, finding their way home, even when all paths seemed lost. Jessica closed the door softly, leaving just enough space for the hallway light to cast a gentle glow into the room. Some connections needed no explanation, some bonds spoke for themselves, and sometimes, against all odds, guardians found their way across time, distance, and circumstance to where they had always belonged. Dear listeners, we hope you've been touched by Jessica and Ethan's journey with Commander. This story reminds us that some connections transcend explanation, bonds that find their way to us even when they seem impossible. If you've ever experienced a special connection with a beloved pet or felt guided by a presence you couldn't quite explain, we'd love to hear your story in the comments below. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique narratives that explore life's beautiful mysteries and unexpected connections. Don't miss our upcoming content. More stories await that will warm your heart and perhaps help you see your own special bonds in a new light. We'll be waiting for you in the comments.